John, incredibly happy to have you with us today. Just wanted to extend appreciation for the time that you've spent flying out here and hanging out as well. So
Great
thanks
to be
a ton
here.
for being here. Awesome, man. You and I have known each other for, over a decade in various different roles.
It's probably
I would
pushing
say
closer to two.
two
Yeah.
decades. Yeah, it's been a bit. And we've got to talk about a lot of leadership connections along the day, a lot of sort of personal approaches that you've done. And I think you've kind of hit some of the incredible milestones that a lot of people look for. You've led multi-billion-dollar businesses, incredible transformations, all kinds of really phenomenal things that we're going to dive into. But before we get into that, how would you introduce yourself beyond the resume? What would you want people to know about John Carmichael?
If I were to say what's my brand essence, right?
Yeah, perfect.
Marketer by background, I think it's adventure. I mean, I think I enjoy adventure. I enjoy change, discovery, that kind of thing. Personal life, private life, public life, professional life. I think, I think it's shocking that I'm in a large corporation because my belief as a younger professional was entrepreneurism and that change was going to be what was going to feed that sense of adventure. Wouldn't have been articulate about it, but that's probably what I would have said. And I would say the resume that I have now is probably just the sum total of a lot of really interesting experiences that kept the learning curve steep and kept me interested and intrigued in a way that it's sort of the outcome is here I am. But, even on my private time, as you know, I love to go backpacking and I love to get out in nature and I love to explore from that perspective. I love to travel because of the sort of curiosity of discovery of a new place. And I think that's probably a more interesting way to talk about myself than my resume certainly would be.
I don't know. You've had an incredible resume as well. It's been full of adventure. And so we'll chase it a bit, but you're headed into a pretty significant adventure right now as well, coming off of being CEO and president for Nestlé Canada, moving into president of North America for Kimberly-Clark. That's a huge transition and a lot of adventure tied up in that as well. So daunted, excited?
I'd say excited.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you got two incredible organizations. And I know Nestlé really, really well, but some of the things that have made Nestlé great is bringing people in from other organizations with different perspectives and able to sort of collectively create something different over time. And so what's neat for me from an adventure perspective is you got this incredible organization at Kimberly-Clark, over 150 years of success and all the things that they've racked up. And I'm really fascinated to go there and learn about that. Like, what is it about this organization that has done so many incredibly successful things over a period of time?
Yeah.
What drives that? What culture nurtures that? So that part of it is fascinating to me. And then coming from a different perspective, I'll probably have some insights just because I grew up in a different world, as people have with me. So I think the combination of those two things is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to it.
Ultimate adventure for sure, showing up with it. That's
Absolutely.
incredible.
Yeah.
And I know, obviously, you and I talked a lot about it. It wasn't an easy transition to pull out of 3 decades of.
No,
No,
it's a family, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 3 decades, 30 years, you grow up with people. It's more than half my life.
Yeah.
And that team means everything to me, as any team does, right? Any family does.
Yep.
And so I really want to make sure that they're set up and they're going to do well. And the reality of not being there to take care of them is a moment for any leader, I would think.
Yeah, no matter how much you think you're ready for it, those are hard spaces.
Absolutely.
Exciting and hard, which kind of scratches that. And of course, we had chat about it. So I know the intentionality you really put into this decision. It was not an easy decision to make. One you're excited about, but not an easy decision. And that intentionality is something that, if you're willing, I want to hit at a little bit because, we talk a lot about on this forum that a lot of people, the vast majority of people, lead and live life by default, not really by design. They tend to allow themselves to sort of jump in the river and let life take them along a course it's going to take them along it. They don't necessarily intentionally plot and plan. That's never been my experience with you, whether it's the way you interact with people or speak to individuals, business strategies that you're bringing present. The way you're leading always seems to have a deep sense of intentionality behind it. How'd that wiring come about? Have you always been that way? Has that been something that you've really had to curate and bring present, or has that been something that's always been in you?
Yeah. How deep you want to go?
Man, I've got all the time in the world.
Because, as you think about it, and I think in my own head on that one, I think probably the beginning it comes from deep anxiety, right? Of not wanting to mess something up. and needing to put the thought process in to ensure that. I think so many of us, if we're really going to be honest with ourselves, that's what it comes from. It's sort of the dream state to be naked in front of the class, right? To a degree.
Yes.
That is such a famous reoccurring dream that people have. And I think it's probably where it started from. And then after a while, it was optimization, right? I mean, a type A personality probably exists somewhere in my psyche, and
maybe.
Yeah. And these interactions are priceless, and they only happen once if it's a small conversation or if it's a big group. And how do you make sure you get the most out of it? I think that so that's a more productive and maybe constructive way to look at it over time, but that comes with maturity and self-confidence. But I think it's probably a large portion of it is this moment is never going to happen again. How do we get the most out of it? And this move is never going to happen again. So how do I make sure that the collective trajectory that these consecutive moves put me on or us on are the right one?
Yeah. Incredible. And it's funny too, because I think you sort of have this bifurcation of mindset when that uncertainty shows up for some and that insecurity or that anxiety manifests. You have some people that run from it or just tuck away from it. And then you get some folks that walk directly at it. And I think that's where you've heard the language we use. We would qualify the difference between being in the arena and in the stands. Like that's that choice to take those intentional moments and do something with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Incredible. So you have a leadership philosophy that I was recently exposed to, which is outstanding. An incredible list of things inside of it. You wrote a line inside of that I wanted you to chase a little bit because I think it's an incredible line, which you said that clarity is kind. Would you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, human nature is you beat around the bush, right? And you sugarcoat things or use your whatever phraseology you want to use there. And maybe you start from a place by saying how unkind that is, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody wakes up in the morning trying to be their best self.
Nice.
And the thing I always think about is a leader's number one responsibility on a one-on-one basis is to help them get there, right? And not be someone they aren't or try to, improve in that sort of way, but definitely to be their best self and to not be able to give clarity to them one-on-one, which is the first maybe scallop you might think of on that one is unkind to a degree. And therefore, the more clarity you can give is the greater kindness in that particular instance, because it enables them to have the transparency of how they're being perceived or an alternative of how they may operate differently, which they can choose to act on or not. Sure. But without that transparency, that authentic sort of feedback loop, they don't have the benefit of being able to be their best selves potentially for other folks. And then with organizations, it's even more important, right? Because I think a lot of things you see there are people who artificially maybe inflate the organization in a more of a cheerleader stance to say, aren't we great, when the reality might be something different. And I think it is so much better to come from a place of authenticity and reality to say, well, this is where we are, and we are great on some things, and we can be great on others. But without that straight talk, I don't think an organization or a person can take a step back, reflect, and then decide how they're going to show up the next day.
So often I encounter spaces where people want clarity on clarity. So what do they mean by that? So sometimes I encounter spaces where people say, I want, the throwback. I want MapQuest directions.
Yeah.
So I want this discrete set of directionality that I need to go. And that's often coming from a fear base the other space around like, oh man, I don't want to screw this up. If I get these perfect directions from it, I can execute. But then that level of clarity is exhausting. It's unrealistic. And you cannot do that from your chair. On the flip side of that, the movement frequency of clarity, things change, things shift constantly. How do you strike that balance between creating clarity, but then also creating an expectation of clarity seeking from people and finding that lane that just seems to fit right?
Yeah, maybe two thoughts on that.
Yeah.
The first one is that you are there to help them become their best selves, not your best self.
Nice.
Right? And so if you're given MapQuest directions, which by the way, I think does date you, but use that. But we'll get back to that later. Yeah. If you are to give maybe Google Map directions.
Okay, thank you. Better said.
I think you're given
ChatGPT.
Get ChatGPT even there. There you go. All right. Turn that on me. Well done. I think the scenario there is you're really telling them what's your best self.
Yeah.
Right? And in that instance, you're doing a disservice, right? Because you're giving them advice to be somebody they're not. And that can be incredibly damaging, especially from a position of authority. And so you've got to do it with the mindset of helping them become their best self. And by doing it, you have to give space. You can't give a prescriptive response because it absolutely goes to a very specific endpoint.
Yep.
If we're going to stick with your analogy.
Yeah. Nice.
The more space you can give them, the more that they can play in that space to figure out what is their reality. So all you're doing is you're giving them the clarity of how you perceive it or how others might perceive it for them to deal with it as they wish to deal with.
It's something that we find moves all the time. So we always say clarity lasts about a nanosecond, right? There's just shifting space on it all the time.
Yeah.
And if you do try to create that singular defined end point, and so we always say, let's teach you how to read a compass and a topographical map.
I like that.
Because when the landscape shifts and changes, you can use those base tools to create that clarity as you're moving forward.
No question. It's almost like if you look forward, you sort of have a funnel of alternatives out there and you make a decision where you're going to go. And at that point, there's a new funnel that arises. And where you came from is almost irrelevant. It's immaterial,
Yep.
right? The fact of the matter is you are here, and now you've got a new set of, and you get to a point where you hope you had some intentionality of, that's where I was trying to get to. But you probably, as you look back, wouldn't have taken that path because it's a series of independent decisions.
Yeah.
I think one thing that is important in intentionality, to use that word you brought up earlier on, is you do need to know what you're trying to create, who you're trying to become, what you're trying to build.
Yeah.
You need an end state in mind to ensure that you have sort of a true north and where you're going. That said, the decisions along that will not only surprise you, but the true north of the thing you're trying to build will change over time as you understand yourself better and you understand the possibilities of the organization.
That's a fun chase. It implies, which I believe to be true, that somebody has a why behind or a purpose or a reason for their existence or what they're trying to do, whether that's a professional in a business space or a homemaker, that they have some level of intentionality between where they are today and what they're wanting to accomplish. Whereas I think a lot of people don't. Again, default versus design. So part of, if I loop it back to, so I'd ask you this for clarity, if I loop it back to like your ability to be intentional, is some of that tied to you knowing those end states and that why behind you do the things you do?
I think yes. And
yeah,
I think I do try to have a vision of where I'm headed for myself or the organization, but I keep it really flexible. Because the challenge is if you don't keep it flexible, the end state's not going to look like that.
Yeah. Yep.
Better, worse, whatever. But if you don't have the flexibility in your vision of it, then you can constantly come up short or see failure in the fact that it didn't manifest exactly as you saw it put. Yeah. So you have to have the flexibility, but I do believe you need to understand what you're trying to build. Otherwise, the decisions that you make on your journey to get there are simply independent decisions you're making in the fly.
Sure. What's the point that I'm trying to accumulate to some extent? Yep.
Yeah.
Love it. Thank you. Hey, let's shift to something that I think is a complicated space these days and people really struggle knowing how to bump into. And I think you've got a really strong vantage point on it. And so your headspace around it. You have always been someone that I've recognized and admired on being able to be courageous in their leadership, right? So that means being able to stand up for things that need to be stood up for, being able to push back when things need to be pushed back on. So we'll put it in this construct of sort of corporate dogma that exist. And by corporate dogma, we mean things like cultural norms, those long-held assumptions, the sacred cows, like, oh, you can't violate this. The vast majority of every business has these in some way, shape, or form. They can be enablers and they can be incredible disablers.
Right.
And so knowing, you spoke to this idea of, I want to read it because I thought it was great. You had said, being mindful about corporate legends and dogma. And when you need to push back against those versus when you need to admire the legacy that has been. If you're a leader out there listening that's aspiring to lead at the level that you lead, what's the counsel you would give them on how to really read the winds and knowing when you push back on that corporate dogma as a limiting factor versus when you have to sustain that as an enabling factor?
Yeah, let me, so maybe 2 points, maybe
Please.
A heritage story for me personally and then maybe a current situation that I see the world in now. So the heritage story was, I was given this incredible opportunity from a CEO who was very, very future oriented and wanted to understand why we couldn't be more innovative. And so I was doing marketing development at the time, training, capacity, capability building, this kind of thing. And so what a cool journey for a guy who's wired like me to go after with, sort of curiosity. And I do like to innovate. And so I spent a pretty significant period of time just kind of looking around, talking to people, interviewing, doing some studying to myself. I went to, did some coursework. What was interesting was, and this was his briefing of it. He says, no one's telling these people they can't do this, and yet nobody's doing it.
Yeah.
So what's the thing there? And we kind of came up with this idea of the invisible no.
Yeah, I remember this.
Right? Yeah. And the invisible no is that no one's really ever said it, or they said it in indirect ways, or they've seen it said to somebody else. And so what people do is they create these boundaries and barriers that are sort of invisible and self-generated.
Yep.
That aren't necessarily really there. And I think it's human nature to a large degree, but in big organizations where people are loss adverse and concerned and focused on what they need to do to get up based upon the conventions and cultures of that organization, it's even more pronounced. And it's especially pronounced in leaders who tend to be adept at reading the organization and reading where the invisible no's are. And so the idea was, how do you work against the invisible knows? And so it's a little different than the way you describe dogma, but I think that's the origin story for me, is how do you develop a culture that breaks those barriers or maybe prevents them from happening in the first place? And that's a 4-day conversation over several glasses of wine, right?
Yep.
Today, I think what I find is there's that famous quote. What is it? The world's never changed as fast, and it's never going to change as slow again, right?
Yep.
Something to that degree, and that's become somewhat trite because it's said so often. But I think at some point we hit an inflection point, which says that the degree of consistency in driving success versus the degree of sort of flexibility in driving success is shifted. And I think of it like athletics to a certain degree. And if you think about great athletes, like let's talk about those that maybe are in the Olympics, the way they succeeded in most of the disciplines out there are to be able to repeat the same thing with slightly more precision each time, either faster or better or brighter. And I think that's the way large corporations succeeded, right? It was a game of seconds, of pennies, of process design that made it just incrementally better over decades, in some instances centuries. And so these systems developed on scale that were able to be amazingly effective and efficient. And that's how you won as a big company. And in a world of relative stability, it still is, right? The advantage of scale in process, in dogma, in those kinds of things was really efficient, and it was positive. The storied, century-old organizations that we know today, that's how they got here. And so what we're all guilty of is projecting that the future success will come in the same way the past has come. And I believe we've passed that inflection point in a world of pandemics, in a world of inflation, the worst in 70 years, in the world of tariffs, in the world of, you pick the next thing, but now there will be a next thing. It is about your adaptability and your ability to go. And so if you switch from the runner who wants to shave off a half second, or the swimmer that decides to shave their legs because they know it's going to be, and so it's all about that repetition of sort of muscle memory on something very specific. I think of surfers. Every wave's different. And it's not about the precision of doing the exact same thing, exactly the same way, but a second better. It's about reading the wave, understanding your environment, and doing the thing that's situationally appropriate to ride the current wave that you're on. And again, you need that vision of where you're headed. Otherwise, it's just chaos and a bunch of individual decisions. And it isn't that the skill set isn't still incredibly valuable. Like, the balance and the ability to read the wave and all the things required to be an outstanding surfer are still really, really important. And it is a sport with specializations and capability building. But the thing that you add into it is the ability to read the wave and respond to something that is unique every single time. So it's less like a sprinter and more like a surfer.
So
that may not answer your question.
No,
at all.
we're gonna build on it. No, because I think it did in so many ways. So here's what I'm thinking about. I'm out of my lane with surfing, but I'm gonna try. So you're a new surfer. You're bringing out your board for the first time, second time, third time. You're getting it, and you've got those old timers that have been in the water for a long time, and they have an approach and they know. And then all of a sudden, you come in and you're trying to push on that standard way things are done, you're going to get reactance. So I think sometimes what we hear or we see happen is pretty senior leaders trying to invoke a willingness for the people that they're leading to challenge dogma, challenge that status quo and push on it. But that invisible no can be really strong, especially if they push and that surfer that's been in the water and been surfing that wave for 30 years says, that's not what we do here. That tends to get really shut down.
Yeah.
So what's the advice you give to those folks that are new to surfing or they're coming into an organization or that they're more junior in it and they see less effective, less efficient ways that things are happening and they really want to push on it? But they're 6 tiers down from the CEO chair and they try to knock on it and they just get shut down, or that invisible no, while oftentimes I agree is a function of self-limiting beliefs. We create those, but at times those are genuine things that happen.
Absolutely.
Somebody pushes and they get a shut down. So what's the counsel that you give to somebody that's really trying to push back on that dogma or try to evolve it to a new place, but they just keep getting hit with either that perceived or that real no?
Yeah. Yes, there's two different perspectives on that, right? So one is the perspective of the leader who's trying to develop a culture that maybe protects against the invisible no, or maybe enables a situation where it doesn't get created in the first place. And the second one is the individual who's trying to find their way in a corporation and let's say has a great idea or a thought process that's different, and how do they approach it? And you're asking about the latter, is what I understand.
Correct.
You'd be asking about there.
Yep.
So in the latter situation, I think the question is how you navigate, right? I mean, that is probably the word I would use, because they often say big organizations are risk adverse, and they are, and they can be, but I think more appropriately they're loss adverse. They are protecting something that has great value that they don't want to put at risk.
Yes.
And if you think about it that way, then I think if you've got a good idea or a disruptive idea or a thought, then the question is, if you want to navigate that through the organization, what is the way to risk mitigate it in such a way that those in power to give you that authority can allow it to go through? Sometimes it's a massive investment, right?
Sure.
And the question is, can you chunk it out and find a way to show success over time and earn the second and third and fourth and fifth pieces of investment? Would be a good example of it. Does it put the organization at risk? If so, how do you risk mitigate that? What are the things that you're doing that might make somebody or the corporate we of the organization nervous, that you can find a way to risk mitigate it or chunk it out in pieces and parts that enables you to allow yourself to continue to progress?
Yeah.
And I think if you find there's a good idea, you've got a good vision, and everybody agrees it adds inherent value, and you've got a way to risk mitigate it in such a way that no one's betting the farm, as it were, then unless there's a better idea that somebody wants to invest in, and you've got to be open to that, then I think a lot of good leaders are going to let you go there.
And that means you got to have the ability to know how to influence toward an outcome you're looking for.
No question.
If I've got something that I want to sort of challenge, if we'll use that construct of some sort of version of a corporate dogma, I know we've done it this way, but what if we do this? I think a lot of times what we experience is we can experience individuals that they're frustrated by the current state.
Sure.
And the approach set is almost to just come in and be angry about it. And we need to do something differently, versus recognizing that, look, there's a big if-then table here. If this is the outcome that I want, then this is the approach that I need to take to move it to a new place, which involves skillful influence in my capability set. Fair?
It does, but I think they always say that the best way for you to develop is to figure out what's the mindset and the decision set of the person and group that's the next level up, and get yourself in that and start thinking in their decision. What better way than to say, why would this person say no? What is the risk associated or the threat to resources or the priority of resources that would cause them to say no to this? And how do I get myself in that mindset? There is probably no better development for the next level of your career than to put yourself in there and find a way to influence them in that way.
Yeah. Probably impossible to do, but we'll try it. If somebody's listening and they say, gosh, I'm in a spot where I really want to challenge an existing legacy thought process or an approach that this organization uses, what's the first step I take?
Probably seek to understand always, I
Nice.
say. Seek to understand why you think that exists in the first place and what purpose does it have for the organization, and then work with it from there.
Nice.
I think, oftentimes, because I'm a bit of a rebel. I was the family rebel. Some might argue I still am. Shocking. I survived in a big corporation, to be completely honest with you. But I think the first thing is to fight, right? Is to disagree, to fight, to push, and rather than seek to understand. And I think if you take that step first, almost in everything, it puts you in a better spot.
Not done often.
No, all of us, right?
Yeah.
I think we're all guilty of not doing it enough. I think if you look at the discourse going on in the country right now, I'd say, regardless of what your point of view is, there's not enough of it going on. So what better time to set an example of doing it?
Well said. Incredibly well said. Last piece I'll chase for you is a big transition for you. So 3 decades with a family inside of Nestlé and moving into a new space where the scale of impact you're able to have is incredibly elevated and has a potential element of dauntingness to it, yet also an element of incredible felt responsibility around it. That can get weighty and people can drop into, I think, almost a anxious stress state around it. And I know part of your philosophy is figuring out really, how do you maintain joy in the journey as you go through all of this? So as you enter into that transition, where's your head and thoughts around how you maintain joy around this sort of, it's an adventure and I know you'll be excited about that in general, but at the same time, I'm certain that it's going to come with some seriously weighty nights that you'll be pondering those dark nights of the soul as you're working through spaces.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I'll give you, it's funny you say that because I'll give you 2 thoughts, one of which I imagine you're expecting and the other one I bet you're not. And the first one is, we often get caught up in the grind and I'm a backpacker, right? It's what I love to do. I've done it for years and decades, and it's a big family thing. And I've got a group that does it every single year for 23 years. And so the analogy I will use is on that. You're looking up at the mountain you need to climb, and you look up at it, and it's daunting, and it's way up there, and you're spending your energy figuring out your path that you're going to get there, figuring out how you're going to get yourself and your big heavy pack up to the next altitude. And I found that what's really, really important, and this is an analogy on life, is to turn around and look at how far you've climbed and enjoy the view and stop and appreciate the effort that it took you to get there and the beauty of what has been accomplished, and do it as a team too, because generally you're doing it with other people. And we don't do that enough. Yeah. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone, but I find whenever I'm getting super duper frustrated, that is my trigger to say, how far have we come up, right? And look at the altitude and enjoy the climb. So I think that's one really important piece. And I do it on a regular basis. It is part of my discipline. I never do it enough, and I never do it for my team enough. But I try to do that as much as I can. Capture the small wins too, of course, is of the same theory and concept. The other one is sort of know your purpose, right? Which is which I think is helpful. I always say, what do you want people? What do you want on your gravestone at the end of the day? It's a question I'll come back to you on in a minute. So you're lucky I give you some time to thought. Nice. Mine came from the best job I've ever had, which was a camp counselor when I was 19 years old, 20, 21, 22. Frankly, I'd still in many ways a camp counselor, I suppose my team would say. But I had a camper who was afraid of horses, but really wanted to ride the horse, right? And the kid was 6, right? So pretty darn young, giant animal. It's intimidating under any circumstances when you're a 6-year-old.
Thing's a beast, like a dragon. Yeah.
And it scared him. And so we worked on it over the course of the summer, right? I think I had him for 2 sessions. So I did have him for an extended period of time because I couldn't get him near for the beginning. But it was clear he really wanted to do it because he always gravitated to do that. He'd sign up for horses, but he'd never go up there. And so little by little, we got him closer and closer to the horse. The person who ran the horsing group was with me on that, and eventually we got him on the horse, but we wouldn't move. And then over time, in any event, to make a long story short, at the end of the summer, we had this kid riding, and his parents came to pick him up, very aware that he was completely frightened of probably all large mammals, but certainly horses. Sure. And the look on this face of this kid when he rode the horse up to greet his parents, because we'd worked it, right? We worked it that he was going to ride the horse up to me. It was something that to this day, breaks me up to even think about. But that ability to try and get a team to be their best selves individually and collectively, and to do something they couldn't imagine they could have done, that's what it comes from. That's what's great.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that, whatever it is for you, that's what it is for me. Doesn't matter to me, it needs to be that for you. But if whatever it is for you, if you are doing that, there is joy. It doesn't always feel like it's joyful, but there is joy. And again, if you're looking at the vision of what do I want to accomplish, as long as you hold that in your heart and you go after it, then you're doing the right thing day by day to make that happen. And that thing that you want on your gravestone, that you want to be known for at the end of the day, you're going to be known for.
Love it.
So what do you want to be known for?
Yeah, I was waiting for that. So this one is something that I've thought about a long time, and it's actually one of the core drivers of my entire career arc. And it comes from, it's a quote that we've talked about actually on this show, is it's a Thoreau quote that the masses of men lead lives of quiet desperation.
Wow.
So many people sit silently in a state of longing for something more than they are being, whether that's a leader, whether that's a parent, whether that's a friend. They're sitting in the stands. They want a different life, and they will live it vicariously through a movie they watch or a book that they read, and they'll wish and they want. And that, frankly, just pisses me off. I don't want them to do it. So I have constantly and consistently tried to live in this space that says, how do I help people first recognize what they want to do and are able to do, and then realize it? Get out of your own way. Wow. The amount of self-limiting beliefs that we put on ourselves that push us into those stands where we just don't want to do. Man, I don't want that. So my hope is that on my, my headstone, it says that I disrupted that.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
That is amazing aspiration if you can achieve that.
Man, I don't know yet. It's towards your point before. We always describe it as planting oak tree seeds. You just probably will never see them grow fully.
Yeah.
But you can plant them along the way.
That's true.
Genuine appreciation for you hanging out with us today. I'm incredibly excited to see what you do with Kimberly-Clark. That leadership team is, they're fortunate to have you. So thank you a ton for hanging with us. I'm fortunate to have them. Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the fun. I can't wait to see what makes them tick.
Yeah. I think it's going to be an incredible transition for you. So excited. Thanks a ton. Appreciate it. And until next time.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.